Definitely, there has been a transformation of the celebration of this day in Ukraine. In my opinion, it is a quantum social transition from celebration to honoring the dead, from loud festivities, from parades, flags and fetishization of the Soviet military paraphernalia to mourning, remembrance and respect for the memory of the dead without national hysteria, which is in Russia is called patriotism. How true is all that I just mentioned of the above for Israel?
Но у нас вот то, что вы назвали фетишизацией, она тоже происходит.
We have what you called fetishization. It has also been happening since about 2017. In 2017, in Israel, we adopted a law on the celebration of the 9th of May, the day of the victory of the anti-Hitler coalition over Nazi Germany. And in recent years, it means that we have had other St. George ribbons or something else. Right now, in Eilat, for example, I saw that local deputies are also gathering people there for activity created in Russia. They came up with what is called the Immortal Regiment, that is for relatives to go with portraits. That's a lot in the organization of all these events. Our pro-Russian Israel, our home party, and city council deputies in particular too. I remember that a few years ago, in my opinion, somewhere in 2018, I was invited to hold one of these events in the park, where veterans were sitting, and not only veterans, they were honored. And some dude in a t-shirt with Putin, with a tricolor, with a golden coat of arms on the flag, stuck up there. I don't know where he came from, and they simply didn't let him enter the space where this event was held in the park. He was somewhere in the outskirts and then disappeared. This is not welcomed. But yes, in our country, the Russian narrative has begun to strengthen very strongly in recent years. Well, firstly, this May 9th celebration itself was held with the support of one of the Russian businessmen of Jewish origin. It was lobbied by the same pro-Russian party. You remember, Putin came to us with a furor to Yad Vashem, which later caused huge criticism, because in fact they provided him with a platform for promoting Russian narratives about the Great Patriotic War, which in Israel in general did not exist.
Thank you. Attitude to the May 8-9 holiday itself of civil society in Israel. Is there a social contract on society, some kind of an agreement on the need to celebrate May 9th? I'll clear the fog. Those who don't celebrate, do they not cause misunderstanding or rejection even on the part of the celebrants?
You see, in Israel, there were two relatively large waves of immigration from the Soviet Union. First, in the 70s, there were the Zionists, the conscientious objectors. These are people who were imbued with the more Zionist ideas and brought little of the Soviet narratives with them at all. And the big wave of immigration of the early 19th, which rushed to Israel, just brought out habits. One of the habits was to celebrate the 9th of May. And in general, when it started in Israel, there are a lot of museums at the city level that are dedicated to veterans, sometimes created by the veterans themselves. There are quite a lot of events in Israel. Therefore, always, as if early in Israel, on the basis of the law of 1953, the holiday of heroism was celebrated. It was a date in memory of the victims of the disaster. The general contribution of Jews, primarily Jewish soldiers, to the war and to the victory of the Hitler's Nazism was noted. Indeed, in Russia, where anti-Semitic tales are spreading that the Russians saved the Jewish people, well, for example, my grandfather, peace be upon him, spent 4 years in the war, and my grandmother, who survived the blockade of Leningrad. I can say the same thing, that the Jews saved the Russian people. It's just not right, because everyone was saving everyone. There were 500,000 Jews. There were 550,000, if I'm not mistaken, or 560,000 Jews in the Soviet army. In the armies of the Allies, there was more. When the Soviet people began to arrive, and it was the 9th of May holiday, that was important for them. They began to celebrate the holiday of the 9th of May, mainly with the support of those political forces that later received their votes in the next elections. It didn't irritate anyone, as well as one on the part. It did not cause irritation that someone did not celebrate it. There were very often that they were not allowed to hold a parade, but not a military parade, but just a procession. And these processions were organized in such a relatively private way on the ground. People still walked much as long as they could.
Ukraine was forced to be reborn in the flames of this war. We need to resist Russian armed aggression, and Europe and the collective West soft Russian power. In particular, in the Baltic countries, it is especially clearly visible what kind of measures are being taken, if taken, by Israel in the context of countering Putin's regime and protection from attempts to influence the country's foreign and domestic policy, just by the way.
Absolutely none, unfortunately. You know that few days ago it was ended the visit of the Ukrainian delegation. Your Vice Speaker Olena and 2 more deputies of the Verkhovna Rada flew in. At meetings with our politicians at various levels, they also raised the question, why are Russian propaganda channels still broadcasting in Israel and spread disinformation that spread Russian narratives that engage in brainwashing? There are so many countries, that have turned them off. Why does this continue? The answer is apparently the same as throughout Europe. The farther from the front line, the less this stench of the war unleashed by Russia is felt. Therefore, in general, there is no barrier in anything on the way of the spread of Russian narratives by their state here. Russian channels are broadcasting on almost all local platforms that exist. There are no sanctions, neither personal nor state ones have been introduced. People are free to come. That is, for example, it is not very clear to me why people who are under European or American sanctions can come here. The Russian narrative, which manifests itself in the fact that Holocaust Remembrance Day is commemorated there in January on the day the Soviet troops captured Auschwitz. In Israel, another day is set aside for this. Absolutely. Day of the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. Again, this is a clash of two narratives. Well, all that can be stopped by civil society in accordance with its ethical code, morality, understanding that fascism, Nazism, in any of its forms, in this case in Russian, cannot be supported either directly or indirectly. But there are a lot of people who say, well, what's wrong with that?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I just understood from your words that political establishment and a civil society in Israel are separated.
Quite right. The Israeli society is almost entirely on the side of Ukraine. So to speak, it is divided into two approximately identical groups. These are people who are on the side of Ukraine and people who believe that we do not need to interfere in this. Here are those who believe that we do not need to interfere. These are the more current ruling coalition electorate. The people who are on the side of Ukraine. This is more the electorate of the opposition. But the fact is that neither the opposition, the political parliamentary one, nor the current coalition are ready for a direct condemnation of Russia, for direct political statements. They are not ready to call a spade a spade. And even when there are some completely barbaric crimes against the civil population, as in Uman, which we saw the other day, a blow to residents' high-rise building and others, and even when there are some completely barbaric crimes against the civilian population, as in Uman, which we saw the other day, a blow to resistical high-rise buildings and others, and yet some statement is issued by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. For example, you will not find the word Russia in it. That is, it is just regret and indignation about what happened, and who organized this incident is not said there. It may not be on the official state portal, to be simply distributed by the press service to journalists, to newspapers. So this is a very caution approach. There are no political statements. Well, of course, there is a source of negotiation on humanitarian aid, including on humanitarian security issues. If we are talking about the demining of territories, all this is telling, despite the fact that society in a very significant part, and perhaps in the majority, is undoubtedly on the side of Ukraine. The fact is that even those who do not want to interfere, they might not be on the side of Ukraine, but they also do not like Russia, as if no one loves Russia. This research was done before the war by the Pew Center, and in our country the negative perception of Russia in Israel was, if I'm not mistaken, about 73%. Well, it's understandable given the past, let's say, achievements of the Kremlin.
To your opinion, what is it to be done? Yes, exactly. I mean to solve the question, to resolve the problem.
This is absolutely obvious, and what's more, it's clear to me personally that the longer Israel does not join the club of Western countries on this issue, the more damage the Israeli authorities inflict on their own country. Image damage, diplomatic damage. What to do? It seems to me to do everything that you are already doing. Just maybe to send the delegation more intensively, to explain, to increase the distribution of your media platforms in Israeli, so that ultimately the Freedom Channel would overtake the Russian First Federal Channel in ratings, and RTR, NTV, Zvezda Channel. Well, what else do they have there? Here, for example, one of the speeches that your deputies were holding now, as far as I know, it concerns the deportation of Ukrainian children. And the Israeli deputies they met with are not Russian speakers. They were shocked because they don't know about it at all. Maybe it was spreading information more often and more in Hebrew, in English, aimed at the Hebrew-speaking public. So they that understand what is really going on there. And so that they understand that this is not some kind of distant conflict that will never affect anyone, and everything is not so clear. And why do we need to know about it at all? Just to increase the understanding of the Israelis, to explain at all levels that, guys, we are fighting, including for you, as if it were not good to stand on the sidelines. This is how, when the pressure from the electorate intensifies on the deputies from the ruling coalition or from the opposition, especially since we always have elections looming on the horizon. This is just a permanent threat to them. Then maybe they will finally start to be at least a little more sensitive to this public request. request. But nevertheless, well, no matter how we can get Russian propaganda channels banned in our country, but it is within our power to ensure that Ukrainian channels are watched more than Ukrainian broadcast trash. There is no ban on this either.
Thank you for your very detailed answer. May 14th in Israel is the day of remembrance of Ukrainians, saved Hebrew people in times of World War II. What will happen in Israel in this context?
I think that there will be local events that will be held by Ukrainian community, the community of immigrants from Ukraine and large Ukrainian organizations such as Israeli Friends of Ukraine. For example, these people hold rallies, these people hold meetings. Perhaps your opposition will somehow respond, but this is approximately what is, let's say, the scope of events equal to the celebration of the 9th of May will not be. Of course, something will be done by the Ukrainian embassy, the Ukrainian Cultural Center, which operates in Tel Aviv, but within the frameworks of those who are ready to hear, this will be done. We very often again hold evenings of Ukrainian cinema. We have other cultural events organized by people from this country themselves. People are trying to convey a variety of aspects, and of course the media that tracked it and the website and radio stations, Russian language media. This, you know, is the Ukrainian Ambassador Kornichuk. He said a very correct thing about time ago. He said early in Israel there was a so-called Russian street. It no longer exists. It is now all Ukrainian. That is, in this field awareness will be complete, and some people will take part in these events. Thank you and wish your country a speedy victory, with less blood, with less pain.